Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Hello students, I, Assistant Professor Mayur Thakur, welcomes you all in the video lecture series of Department of English at the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad. In today's session, we are going to discuss one of the famous British novel of modern period called A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, which is block number 8 in the paper number 3 of in the MA course. This is the cover page of Passage to India 1924 novel. In today's session, we are going to discuss following components which covers book info, about author, 20th century English literature, historical background and title of the book, major characters, plot summary, themes, symbols, and we'll discuss your progress. Now, let us discuss the book info. In Passage to India, the author E.M. Forster from 1879 to 1970, which published in 1924. The genre of the novel is historical fiction. As you can see in the slide, the year of publication, author, title, and the genre. Now let us discuss about the author's personal background. E.M. Forster, which is known as Edward Morgan Forster, from January 1, 1879 to 7th June 1970, was an English fiction writer, essayist, scriptwriter, and librettist. As a novelist, he has written 6 novels, which includes A Room with a View, 1908, Howard's End, which is published in 1910, and A Passage to India, which is published in 1924, which brought him, especially The Passage to India, which brought him great success, and it is included in the list of best 100 novels of 20th century. His novels examine class difference and hypocrisy of modern period. Forster had 5 novels published in his lifetime. Although Maurice was published shortly after his death, it had been written nearly 60 years earlier. He never finished his 7th novel, which is titled Arctic Summer. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature in 20 separate years. So that's the achievement that author has. Now, let us discuss the 20th century English literature. 20th century English literature, which is mostly divided into 2 sections. One is modern age and the second is postmodern age. We saw the Great Economic Depression in 1930s. Also, it witnesses the European colonizations and also it falls. The Second World War and the First World War are the major components that covered in the history of 20th century English literature. And the next is the famous quote, that is 20th century is an age of novels rather than novelist. Now, if we go and in detail, the stepwise, the term modern literature refers to the British literature since the beginning of First World War in 1914. The authors of the modern period have experimented with the subject matter, form and style and have produced achievements in all literary genres. Poets of the period includes T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, Dylan Thomas and Seamus Heaney. Novelist, which is very famously known as James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf. Dramatists includes Noel Coward and Samuel Beckett. It can be also subdivided into 2 parts, the Edwardian period and the Georgian period. The Edwardian period is named after King Edward VII. The time from Queen Victoria's death from 1901 to the beginning of World War I in 1914. During this time, the British Empire was at its height and the wealthy lived lives of materialistic luxuries. However, 4/5 of the English population lived in squalor. The writings of the Edwardian period reflect and comment on these social conditions. For examples, Writers such as George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells attacked social injustice and the selfishness of the upper classes. Other writers of the time include William Butler Yeats, Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, Henry James, and E.M. Forster. Now, the another period is Georgian period. The Georgian period refers to the period of British literature that is named after the reign of George V from 1910 to 1936. Many writers of the Edwardian period continued to write during the Georgian period. This era also produced a group of poets known as the Georgian poets. These writers now regarded as minor poets. It were published in 4 anthologies entitled George Poetry, which is published by Edward Marsh between 1912 and 1922. Georgian poetry tends to focus on rural subject matter and is traditional in technique and form. Now, also the modern era saw the Great Economic Depression in 1930s, which is started in the USA. And also, because of the rebellion, fall of European colonization started in the Southern Asia, and the European colonies now started revolting against their oppression and start liberating themselves from their colonizers. It also witnessed 2 world wars and experimenting of new genres such as stream of consciousness, science fictions has also started. Realism, surrealism, imagism, stream of consciousness, all the new genres were experimented by different novelists, poets, and dramatists. And that's why, one of the most significant form was novels. And that's why it is called Age of Novels rather than novelist. Now, let us look at the text, its historical background, and title of the book. The title of the novel, in 1912, the title of the novel, which itself taken from a passage to India, which is basically a poem written by Walt Whitman, a famous American poet. Now, if you look at the historical background of the text, we can say in 1912, Foster traveled to India to meet his friend Masood in the city of Bankipur and stayed for 6 months. He took copious notes on everything he saw. Nearby were the Barabar caves. In the novel, the city of Bankipur became Chandrapur and the Barabar caves became the Marabar caves, which means the things that is discussed in the novel are the real ones. It is, we can say, the tour that he had in 1912, and whatever he observed, he has described in his novels. The title refers to American poet Walt Whitman's poem A Passage to India. This allusion provides a contrast between Whitman's romantic view of colonization and Foster's darker view of the racism and suppression that often accompanies it as he traces the voyage of Adela quested from England to India. The novel has a third-person omniscient narrator who provides authoritative insight regarding the background and minds of the characters. Now, let us see the character map of the novel. As you can see in the character, the Aziz, the young Muslim doctor, which is the central character of the novel. Now, let us discuss the history and the importance of every character. First, Dr. Aziz, the protagonist of the novel, who practiced medicine in the Chandrapur. If you look at the major characters, another major character in the novel, it includes Miss Adela, who accused Dr. Aziz of a rape, which is a very serious incident that is depicted by the author in the novel. Next is Ronnie, who is a city magistrate of Chandrapur who is engaged to Miss Adela. Now, Mrs. Murray. She is an elderly English woman visiting India, and she is very much interested in Indian culture and heritage. Another major character is Professor Gorbole, who is a professor at government college. Next is Mr. Cyril Fielding, who is working as a principal at government college. Hamidullah, who is a sophisticated Muslim lawyer, and also he is a good friend of Dr. Aziz. As we have seen the characters, now let's look at the storyline, or we can say the plot of the novel. In every story, if we discuss the significance of the plot, as Aristotle says, plot is the soul of tragedy in his very famous work Poetics. In novel, also plot plays a major role in the development of the stories. Now let us discuss the plot of the novel Passage to India. Two English women, the young Miss Adela Quested and the elderly Mrs. Murray, travel to India. Adela expects to become engaged to Mrs. Murray's son Ronnie, a British magistrate in the Indian city of Chandrapur. Adela and Mrs. Murray each hope to see the real India during their visit, rather than cultural institutions imported by the British. At the same time, after when they arrived in India, they saw that Aziz, a young Muslim doctor in India, is increasingly frustrated by the poor treatment he receives at the hands of the English. Aziz and two of his educated friends, Hamidullah and Muhammad Ali, hold a lively conversation about whether or not an Indian can be friends with an Englishman in India. That night, Mrs. Murray and Aziz happen to meet each other while exploring a local mosque, and the two become friendly. Aziz is moved and surprised that an English person would treat him like a friend. Mr. Turton, the collector who governs Chandrapur, hosts a party so that Adela and Mrs. Murray may have the opportunity to meet some of the more prominent and wealthy Indians in the city. At the event, which proves to be rather awkward, Adela meets Cyril Fielding, the principal of the government college in Chandrapur. Fielding, impressed with Adela's open friendliness to the Indians, he invites her and Mrs. Murray to have a cup of tea with him and the Hindu professor Godbole as well. At Adela's request, Fielding invites Aziz to tea as well. At the tea party, Aziz and Fielding immediately become friendly, and the afternoon is overwhelmingly pleasant until Ronnie Hislop arrives and rudely interrupts the party. Later that evening, Adela tells Ronnie that she has decided not to marry him. But that night, the two are in a car accident together, and the excitement of the event causes Adela to change her mind and about her marriage. Not long afterward, Aziz organizes an expedition to the nearby Marabar caves for those who attended Fielding's tea, and Fielding and Professor Godbolo that day missed the train to that particular place called Marabar. So Aziz continues on alone with the two ladies, Adela and Mrs. Murray. Inside one of the caves, Mrs. Murray is unnerved by the enclosed space, which is crowded with uncanny echo that seems to translate every sound she makes into the noise boom. Aziz, Adela and a guide go on to the higher caves while Mrs. Murray waits below. Adela, suddenly realizing that she doesn't love Ronnie, asks Aziz whether he has more than one wife, a question he considers offensive. Aziz storms off into a cave, and when he returns, Adela is gone. Aziz scolds the guide for losing Adela, and the guide runs away. Aziz finds Adela's broken field glasses and leads down the hill back at the picnic site. Aziz finds Fielding waiting for him. Aziz is unconcerned to learn that Adela has hastily taken a car back to Chandrapur, as he is overjoyed to see Fielding. Back in Chandrapur, however, Aziz is unexpectedly arrested. He is charged with attempting to rape Adela Quested while she was in the caves, a charge based on a claim Adela herself has made. Fielding, believing Aziz to be innocent, angers all of British India by joining the Indians in Aziz's defense. In the weeks before the trial, the racial tensions between the Indians and the English flare up considerably. Mrs. Murray is distracted and miserable because of her memory of the echo in the cave and because of her impatience with the upcoming trial. Adela is emotional and ill. She too seems to suffer from an echo in her mind. Ronnie is fed up with Mrs. Murray's lack of support for Adela, and it is agreed that Mrs. Murray will return to England earlier than planned. Mrs. Murray dies on the voyage back to England, but not before she realizes that there is no real India, but rather a complex multitude of different Indias. At Aziz's trial, Adela, under oath, is questioned about what happened in the caves. Shockingly, she declares that she has made a mistake. Aziz is not the person or thing that attacked her in the cave. Aziz is set free, and Fielding escorts Adela to the government college, where she spends the next several weeks. Fielding begins to respect Adela, recognizing her bravery in standing against her peers to pronounce Aziz innocent. And Ronnie breaks off his engagement to Adela and she returns to England. Aziz, however, is angry that Fielding would befriend Adela after she nearly ruined Aziz's life, and the friendship between the two men suffers as a consequence. Then Fielding sails for a visit to England. Aziz declares that he is done with the English and that he intends to move to a place where he will not have to encounter them. And later on, after 2 years of that incident, Aziz has become the chief doctor to the Raja of Mau, a Hindu region several hundred miles from Chandrapur. He has heard that Fielding married Adela shortly after returning to England. Aziz now virulently hates all English people. One day, walking through an old temple with his 3 children, he encounters Fielding and his brother-in-law, and Aziz was surprised to learn that his brother-in-law's name is Ralph Murray. It turns out that Fielding married not Adela Quested but Stella Murray, Mrs. Murray's daughter from her second marriage. Aziz befriends with Ralph Murray. After he accidentally runs his rowboat into Fielding's, Aziz renews his friendship with Fielding as well. The two men go for a final ride together before Fielding leaves, during which Aziz tells Fielding that once the English are out of India, the two will be able to be friends. Fielding asks why they cannot be friends now, when they both want to be. But the sky and the earth seem to say no, not yet. No, not there. So friends, this is the storyline of the novel Passage to India, in which the final lines depicts that they can be together. Not yet. Not there. Because of the novel which describes the colonial rule as well as the realities that white and the other Indians people felt during that period of time. Because it was an era of colonization. India at that point of time suffering from various problems. Also, World War and the era of, we can say, political changes. And also the historical background which gives the reality that happens in that period. Now, after discussing the plot and the storyline of the novel, we would like to move on to the next slide, that is themes. A failure of rationality, the very first theme that we discuss in the novel in detail. So there are many themes in the novel which shows that there are a lot of, we can say, the layers which is described by the author. Now, in the novel Passage to India, Foster illustrates a rational approach to life which fails to enable the English to understand India or Indians. Empiricism often leads to incorrect conclusions or no conclusions, and those who believe they are being objective often miss important truths. The English tend to observe, identify, and label, but they often fail to do so, just as Ronnie and Adela fail to identify a green bird. The English in the novel, especially those charged with administering the law, think they are objective and rational, but the reader sees how biased and misguided they can be. The English characters that are more successful are those who allow themselves to be guided by emotion or intuition, such as Mrs. Murray or Fielding observed. Mrs. Murray feels the holiness of the mosque. She thinks Aziz to be innocent because she knows his character during his tea party. Fielding chooses not to correct Aziz about the water in the mosque because he cares more for truth of mood than objective truth. When Fielding enunciates an emotional understanding of the reason for Parda, Aziz senses his kindness and feels understood, and Ralph Murray, by instinctively knowing who is his true friend, is like his mother, an oriental person. But Adela, honest and well-intentioned, fails to understand India or Indians and is unable to convince or communicate with them because she has no real affection for them. Now, let's look at the another important theme of colonialism. The novel demonstrates how colonialism, or the control of one country over another, warps and hinders human interaction and even deprives individuals of their full humanity. Readers see this initially through the talk of Aziz and his educated friends at the beginning of the novel. Their dinners are interrupted, they are snubbed, their tongas are taken, and they clutch at scraps of civility English people may have tossed them. Often they can express themselves only through whispered sarcasm. Hamidullah experience is very telling. He was practically a member of the Bannister family when he lived in England, but he would not dream of approaching the son, now who is a merchant in India. Now, let's see the another thing which is very important. It shows the human significance. At various points throughout the novel, the focus of literary action, namely the realm of normal human affairs, is suddenly rendered small or insignificant by a variety of factors. This starts in the first chapter, in which the narrative eyes sees a world far vaster than anything any of the human inhabitants can see. Then, after readers are absorbed with human affairs for 9 chapters, they are reminded once again in chapter 10 that it matters so little to the majority of living beings what the minority that calls itself human desires or decides. Now, the next slide, which shows the inscrutability of India. Despite their powers of rationality and empiricism, the British find India, both its human inhabitants and its nature, inscrutable. The British lack empathy for the Indians, which hinder their understanding. Furthermore, both the British and Muslim characters, as well as the readers, are mystified by ideas from Hinduism, such as the appeal to Krishna in Godbole's song. But the landscape of India is also beyond there, and the reader's understanding, Adela and Raleigh failed to identify the animal that hits the Nawab Bahadur's car and later cannot identify a little green bird. On their way to the Marabar, Adela and Mrs. Murray thinks they will see a beautiful sunrise but are disappointed, and the caves themselves remain a mystery to the end of the novel. Now let's look at the symbols that novel has. The very first is caves. The Marabar caves loom throughout the books as a symbol of the mysteries not only of India but also of the universe. Their very location seems mysterious. They are far away from human habitation and are set in hills that seem to have suddenly erupted from a plain. The caves remain a mystery. They seem to symbolize all that remains unknown and knowable in the world. Even to the most rational and scientific of minds, the eye cannot really see them. Even when someone lights a candle inside, only the flame is visible, and the mystery of what happened to Adila and the Marabar caves is never cleared up. Rational people can speculate, but they can't know. Now, the second theme is caves echo. The echo also symbolizes an echo in the sense of sound that carries a long way. The effect of that movement in the cave carries through the entire book, and it doesn't cease until 2 years later in Mau, when Fielding and Aziz reconcile. This occurs in a series of events echoing earlier events, with Aziz calling an Englishman named More an Oriental and then giving him a tour of an aspect of India he himself doesn't understand. Now, the third important thing, which is wasp. The wasp Mrs. Murray encounters on her coat hook at the end of chapter 3 represents an object of indiscriminate love from a Hindu perspective. Mrs. Murray, upon seeing it, calls it a pretty deer, which illustrates her ability to love anything of beauty, no matter how alien it may be. The Indians, presumably Hindus, who discuss the kingdom of heaven with Mr. Sorley in chapter 4, test the Christian missionaries' broadness of mind when they ask if a wasp may receive God's love. Finally, the wasp appears along with Mrs. Murray in the mind of Professor Godbole during the religious festival in the Mau when he is trying to love all things equally. It's as if Foster is saying if one can love a wasp, one can love anything. Now, let us sum it up, and also one of the most important thing that we have seen in this novel, that is themes and symbols. After discussing all the points, we come to the conclusion that people have faced a lot of troubles during the 20th century history, and also the war and the colonial period that happened for more than 200 years in India has brought a lot of changes, and also we can say the cultural changes due to the British colonization. E.M. Foster tried to describe the reality as he observed during his visit in 1912 to the person called Masood, and also by the author. Thank you all. We will see you in the next lecture.
स्वाध्यायः